You're listening to The Dead Prussian, a podcast about war and warfare.
We've talked a little bit about profession, ethics, laws, what makes a professional. Well, we've talked a little bit about them, but as you know, I'm trying to get to the hub of it. How do we encourage investment in understanding what is a professional in terms of a military professional? I still don't have all the answers I need, so hopefully I can find someone that does. G'day listeners, and welcome back to the Dead Prussian podcast. Thanks very much for all your support in all of our episodes recently. We have had a diverse cast of guests, which is good because that's what we try and aim to bring you so we can encourage a broad discussion on war. Now today I'm revisiting the Redefining the Modern Military professional discussion, and this is obviously based on a book that has been released by some good friends of mine. Now, why are we revisiting it? Because there are 3 chapters in that book when I managed to get my hands on a copy of it that I read and found absolutely fascinating. And I'm up to the 3rd guest from those 3 chapters. My guest today is Jo Brick. Jo is a legal officer in the Royal Australian Air Force. She served in the Australian Defence Force operations in Iraq and Afghanistan and has extensive experience providing legal support to combined and joint air operations, cybersecurity, detainee operations, and military justice. She is a graduate of the Australian Command and Staff College, like all great people are, and recently graduated from the Australian National University with a Master's Advanced in Military and Defence Studies Honours. Now, for those of us who don't have the advanced and honours, that means Jo is an overachiever. Her thesis was on Australian military relations and strategy. Jo is also an editor of Central Blue, which is a great website where they held discussions on the modern military professional that's related to air type stuff. I read it occasionally, but when I do read it, I do enjoy it. She's also an editor on the website and online journal The Strategy Bridge, who are great friends of the show, and you all know them. And she's also a member of another group that happen to be great friends of the show, the Military Writers Guild. It sounds a bit like a whole mafia network, actually. Jo, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mick. I'm happy to be finally on a show that I love listening to. So it's great to be a guest.
It's always good when guests lie and say they love listening to the show, people. Thanks very much, Jo.
I'm not lying. It's true, mate.
Now, Jo, before we start discussing the relationship of law, ethics, and the profession of arms, can you tell us a little bit about how you wound up joining the Redefine project?
Okay, so I guess the journey started in 2014 at Staff College, towards the end of it, during, I have to admit, a very boring lecture where I started my own blog on Medium.
Yep.
And that's when Clausewitz Rocks was born.
Best handle on Twitter ever.
Anyway, so I sort of joined the Twitter sphere there and I guess met virtually at that point someone called Nate Finney who had retweeted a tweet by Pauline Shanks-Corin, which was asking a question about what the modern profession looked like. And I think at that point I was just fascinated by the comments that were in there, and it ultimately became a Strategy Bridge hashtag series, which, and a lot of that stuff is now forms the basis of this book. So I think Pauline's probably being modest and probably didn't talk to you about it in detail in your last interview with her, but I reckon she is really the starting point for the project. So it basically is a Twitter-initiated book project, which makes it exciting in itself.
It's quite cool itself, you know, a Twitter-initiated book project, one that, you know, as a dutiful guest, you've mentioned previous guests before from the show, Nate Finney, listen to his podcast episode with us. It's quite good. I sound great. He's a little bit boring. But also Pauline, I think, is my most prevalent guest on the show, particularly in discussing ethics, because that's her speciality. She's a philosopher and a professor and all these accolades that most of us won't achieve, although looking at your bio, you're well on your way.
I just want a different job, I think. Hopefully my boss is not listening.
Yeah. No, it's not. I've blocked him in his office.
Yeah, good.
Now, getting to the book, this Twitter-generated book, your chapter focuses on, from my reading of it, which could be completely off kilter, legal and ethical codes and creating a framework, I suppose, of accountability for military professionals to be able to achieve what they need to achieve on the battlefield. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this forms a framework?
I guess noting my background as a lawyer, that's when I saw the question on Twitter, I thought I'd give that a good crack because we always talk about the profession of arms and being a member of the legal profession. It's always brought home to you that there's a couple of characteristics that are born of that. Accountability is one aspect.
Yeah.
And obviously that's sort of what I talk about in my chapter is that that accountability framework is born out of the mismatch between what you know as a professional, so your deep knowledge in something, and your client. In our case, it's the state, who has to trust us to use military force in its interests rather than in our own.
Yeah.
And obviously that accountability framework, which is largely in a liberal democracy based on the rule of law, legal frameworks, and ethical frameworks, is really what the state uses to keep its military forces in check and doing the things that it wants it to do.
Okay, so a little bit of law in there for the listeners. Don't worry, we won't go too in depth into legislative frameworks, or we might once we get
I
to
promise I won't.
Defence Act, something 3 AAA or something like that. Trust me, it's going to get quite interesting. Now, you talked how militaries use force on behalf of their clients, which is the state, and that's kind of why they get paid, right? You know, that's their job. How is the use of force guided by frameworks in liberal democracies, particularly when you have, you know, the legal frameworks are generally, from my understanding, established by civilian leaders.
Yep.
And you have military professionals executing their tasks under those frameworks. Can you give us a little bit of discussion on that? Probably your answer might involve the fact that, you know, we have lawyers in uniform like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely part of the answer. But taking it back to the foundations, I suppose, if you look at Huntington, you know, that seminal text is really establishes the civilian control of the military framework for liberal democracies. And a lot of that flows down through, you know, as you say, our job is to use force, but states want to control how that force is used in two ways, really.
Yeah.
It situates, laws used to situate the military, so that's what you alluded to in Part 3 AAA, in that the military can't act, you know, domestically without the state saying that it can in liberal democracies, because it's used primarily as an external force in a philosophical sense. And the second sort of string of that is how the military uses force. So that's your, you know, international legal framework, so your laws of armed conflict or international humanitarian law, which then permeates through things like, for us in Australia, the Defence Force Discipline Act, and the Criminal Code, which applies to us. And in the US, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So, you know, that's how the use of force is generally guided by those frameworks. And a lot of those legal frameworks also get imported into our rules of engagement and how we are allowed to use force in, you know, given operations. So I guess that's from the conceptual to the tactical, generally how the framework operates.
Well, I pretty much have a law degree now, ladies and gentlemen.
It's really not that hard.
In military law. See, anyone who says being a lawyer is just reading books is 100% accurate. Now, we've spoken about the conduct attributes and how the framework is established for military professionals. I've also discussed about it on the show before with other guests, and what we haven't really talked about with those other guests is about, I suppose, the legislative framework piece that you just covered then, from the strategic through to the tactical, and how that ties into ethical expectations. How do militaries enforce their professional standards of conduct?
So in the chapter I talk about the legal frameworks. That's the hard law, what's written in legislation, as being, I suppose, the outer boundaries of behaviour. But within that, particularly in its application, is where a lot of the complexity arises when the law makes contact with reality. And I think that's where the ethical piece comes in, because you've got the law as the hard outlines, and the ethical piece is what fills the gaps.
Okay.
So when you've got your soldiers, sailors, airmen out at the tactical level doing their thing, and a situation presents itself to them, how they behave is a function, obviously, of their training, which includes the legal training, but in my view, quite largely, a lot of their ethical foundations, and a lot of that is driven by them as an individual, their values, their background, and a lot of their cultural beliefs, which are significant drivers for their behaviour.
And as you say in your chapter, this becomes important when a soldier, sailor, or airman is out on the battlefield. Let's say the battle wave and the battle wind, because that way I've covered all the services. They don't have a legal officer like yourself with them, do they?
No. We largely exist out in the headquarters with the command group. So in the Air Force, we tend to work out of operations centres. So that's generally where the legal officers are. But at the tactical level, the guys in the cockpit who fly the missions, or the guys out in the field, and girls out in the field or out on ships, generally doing things based largely on their training and the ethical, our culture as a defence force, that drives a lot of their behaviour. But the complexity is when you're faced with a bit of a dilemma. And one of the ones that comes up quite often in the air domain is the collateral damage aspects. And so things like the law says the law is quite permissive about collateral damage. It's accepted in international law that that's an outcome of the use of military force, but there's a lot of ethical things that arise from that. Some people might find that quite challenging in terms of its the effect of the use of force on people like civilians who are in the battle space, obviously. So whilst the law is quite forgiving, a person's ethical beliefs might challenge them in that sense.
And I suppose what we find there is a situation where you have, as you said, that hard boundary of the law, and then the murkiness in between, where it may be permissive under law, but it may not be justifiable to an individual on their moral standpoint based on their professional standards and conduct. Which makes it interesting enough to tweet about and then write a book about. But you also cover off two examples, and they're good examples of people attending staff colleges to discuss during ethics weeks. Can you sort of talk to us about these two examples and why you chose them for your chapter?
Well, they were chosen largely because of staff college, as you say. And they are just very, they're quite stark reminders of some of the challenges people have faced in the past. And they're easy to discuss because there's a lot written about it. A lot of ethical challenges we face in current operations, I think people carry that without really wanting to discuss it. Whereas in these situations, they're quite widely known, so they're easy to talk about. The first one's obviously Srebrenica, which is a well-known scenario arising from the Bosnian War, and the decisions of command groups in that situation where the enclave was under threat from enemy forces. And in that case, I guess there was a lot of decisions made that ultimately ended up in the death of a large number of civilians through a genocide. And so, whilst in that case there's a clear legal answer, so acting in accordance with legal obligations and what UN mandated. Sometimes the incidental effects of that are where the ethical dilemmas arise. Same in Rwanda, where in that case the Zambian commander, the general, decided not to withdraw his battalion, even though he was ordered to do so by UN headquarters. But he did that because he felt that that was a way of protecting the civilians. So there he admits to disobeying orders, but he sort of finds that as a way of acting that's consistent with what he believes to be his ethical obligations.
Which is quite interesting because, I mean, they're both cases of genocide, which I think all the listeners can understand is quite abhorrent, a sort of idea to grapple with operating in that sort of environment. And, following the letter of the law may not be the ethical choice for some.
Exactly.
Whereas maybe not necessarily, or reinterpreting your orders, or not necessarily following a legal order may be the most applicable ethical decision you have to make. Also, note that Australia participated in some actions in Rwanda, protecting people and doing some humanitarian efforts there, and Australian troops were able to, through inaction, protect people, which is quite odd when you think about it in the way that it happened. Anyone who is looking to read into some very deep, challenging ethical quandaries, there's a reason they're actually taught at staff colleges, these two particular issues, because they are quite challenging. Every time you read them, you'll find that you've got a new perspective on them.
And everyone always has a different view, obviously, on what they would have possibly known.
And it's interesting to see how people would go. I mean, I haven't yet come across anyone who said genocide is good. That's kind of a good thing, because
that's definitely a good thing.
that would be quite a concerning point of view, but still within the little nuances within those frameworks you're talking about, there's room for people's perspectives and opinions. Now, before we go to the final question, which I'm sure you're dreading, like most of my guests do, I've got one more question about this chapter and some of the ideas you've put forward. And what something that really struck me is, I'm going to say cool. Most of my listeners will probably say I don't really know what the word cool means. But you discuss ethics training and moral fitness. And you touch a little bit on moral injury in there as well. And I just want to find out from you what you classify as moral fitness, and also how do you train for moral fitness? Right.
Moral fitness is a concept I discovered in researching this book chapter, actually. There's a couple of academics, Dr. Richardson and his colleagues, who wrote about it. And it's about creating attitudes in people that enables them to cope with some of these challenging ethical quandaries and dilemmas. And I suppose how you prepare for that is really through exposure. So the things like staff college scenario-based training, and discussing them, consistently, different scenarios is, I guess, one way of, getting people's mindset into dealing with some of these ethical challenges, because they are common, obviously, in operations, because the law can't control everything in war, as we know. And so, it's really through the scenario-based training that we use in a lot of training institutions that would help in at least exposing people to those dilemmas where there's not a clear right or wrong answer. There's a number of options in between. And it allows people to start thinking about, how they would react in those situations. Because LOAC training, or laws of armed conflict training, sets, as I mentioned before, the hard do's and don'ts, but there's a lot of grey in between there. And working in that grey space is really where these you can grow that moral fitness and start dealing with some of those really complex ethical quandaries.
And you talk about an existential disintegration in this chapter. And what I really liked is you used the writing someone had done comparing the military challenges of moral fitness against the TV series Breaking Bad, which was just it's just a really cool way to go.
Well, Breaking Bad is all about moral dilemmas, so it's a good one to use.
And just good TV. Now, I also like how you finish that with a General George C. Marshall quote, that particular part of your chapter. I'm going to read it out just because I think it's a good chapter. It's gendered for those listeners out there who don't know when Marshall was around. He was around before women were serving in the military, so I'm not going to apologise for him, but it's a he-she metaphor. This does not just apply to you fellas, it's also for the ladies. A good officer must learn early on how to keep the beast under control, both in his men and himself. I think that's a pretty good quote. Pretty good quote for you to finish on just before your conclusion in that chapter. But we're not finishing on it in this interview because you have to pay the price. Other than the book you've just given me then, which is not the book that Nate and Ty lent me. It's
a related book. It's a reference.
It's a reference, actually. So listeners, not all guests are so self-involved that they give you copies of their own books. Not that I have a problem with that to any of my former guests that have given me a copy of their book. I much appreciate it. But other guests like to give you further reading when you come and interview them, which means my set list of questions was probably that terrible that Joe felt I needed to do some more reading. Now, Joe, my final question is one you know about because you've listened to the show and supported the show from its inception, actually, so thanks for that. And it's one I ask all the guests, and it relates to our mission on the show, which is to define war in as many ways as possible and then broaden the discussion and conversation on war. Big Carl himself took on this project, and he wrote a book that some people know about, and it's not quite as prevalent as this podcast, but it's doing all right. But what I do is I ask each guest to finish the sentence, war is. So now, Joe, I ask you to finish the sentence, war is.
Okay, look, I'm going to cop out a little bit because this isn't mine, but I liked it. I did prepare for this question. But
excellent.
Okay, so war is what happens when language fails.
Awesome. And where did you steal that one from?
Margaret Atwood.
Excellent. Oh, Margaret Atwood, brilliant. Topical.
Yes.
At the moment too. I have seen some weird marketing about people trying to get on with their costumes for the Handmaid's Tale TV series, which I thought was quite weird because I think a lot of the costume companies that are trying to exploit the merchandise aren't understanding the point of Margaret Atwood's great novel and TV series made from it. But war is what happens when language fails. Excellent. It's also tweetable in the old Twitter, 140 characters. Rest in peace, but also easily tweetable in the 280, which actually helps me with advertising the show.
Exactly.
Look, Joe, thanks very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it and chatting about your book.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show and the show that I love. And I'm not lying. It's a great show. Thanks, thanks, Mick.
Well, listeners, there you had it. The only person lying on the show is myself. Look. Thanks very much for all the support recently, both supporting my efforts in raising money for Soldier On and also supporting the show through Patreon, iTunes reviews, or just plugging us on social media. We really do appreciate it. We're a small show, and the only thing we have to get by is my winning personality and charm. So we're pretty hard at it sometimes. Now, make sure you have a look at Redefining the Modern Military. Pre-sales have been around for quite some time, and this episode will be released around about the same time the book is officially released, so you should be able to find a copy of it at Amazon. And if you're really clever, you can go through the show notes and click on the Amazon or Book Depository, we haven't decided which affiliate we will be by the time we release this episode, link for the show. That way we also steal some of Nate and Ty's money and coin to keep this show running. Another alternative, you can go to the Strategy Bridge and use their smile.amazon.com link. And if you do that, you'll keep the Strategy Bridge, which is a not-for-profit, alive and kicking. You can also support Jo by following her on Twitter and engaging in very interesting conversation with her. And her handle is one of the best handles in this humble podcaster's opinion, and it is @KlauswitzRocks. I'm not going to spell that for you because both words are spelt exactly how they should be. There are no other projects I need to plug right now, so until next time, listeners, grab a book and crack on.
Join the conversation with us on Twitter @DeadPrussianPod, on Facebook at the Dead Prussian page, or on our website www.thedeadprussian.com. All show notes for this episode, as well as copyright information, can be found on the website. The Dead Prussian podcast is written, produced and hosted by Mick Cook. It is co-produced by Amanda Levito. The music used throughout is Caught in the Beat by Broke for Free and is used under a Creative Commons Attribution license. All opinions expressed by individuals on the podcast are those of the individual and not necessarily representative of any other organisation.